Respected participants, all are earnestly requested not to present your screen and accept our resource persons and the anchor. All are requested to mute your camera too, and try not to unmute yourself while discussion will be going on. It is for our better audience, and it is for our smooth ongoing of our program. Please do not share your screen and do not try to unmute yourself. Mute yourself when it is not necessary. Thank you so much. We will start our program within a minute, within 5 to 7 minutes. Good evening, Ashokendu Sengupta sir. আপনার সাথে আমার পরিচয় হয়নি, কিন্তু সুদীপের থ্রু দিয়ে আপনার সঙ্গে মানে ওই আর কি মানসিকভাবে আলাপ হয়ে গেছে। কোনোদিন সাক্ষাতে পরিচয় হলে ভালো লাগবে। স্যার যদি কিছু বলেন তাহলে আপনার
মাইক্রোফোনটা আনমিউট করতে হবে স্যার।
মাইক্রোফোনটা একটু আনমিউট করুন।
ফোনটাতে টাচ করলে মাইক্রোফোন বাটনটা একটু টাচ করুন, আনমিউট হবে।
ফোনের স্ক্রিনটাতে একটু টাচ করুন, তাহলে দেখবেন আপনার মাইক্রোফোন বাটনটা আসবে। হ্যাঁ, ইয়েস ইয়েস
হয়েছে।
হ্যাঁ স্যার হয়েছে।
থ্যাংক ইউ। এই আমার গৃহিণী এসব করে দেয়, তাই করতে পারি, নইলে আমি এখনো রপ্ত করতে পারিনি। যাই হোক, আপনারা শুরু করছেন কখন?
আমরা স্যার এই মিনিট 4-5 একটু ওয়েট করে নিচ্ছি, আমার প্রিন্সিপাল চলে আসবেন, আর ইন দা মিন টাইম রায়ান হাজারও জয়েন করে যাবেন আশা করছি আর কি। তাহলে আমরা 7:30টায় স্যার টাইম দিয়েছি, 7:30টায়, কিন্তু বাঙালি 2-4 মিনিট একটু ওয়েট করে নি। বাকি অন্যান্য পার্টিসিপেন্টস যারা আছে তারাও একটু ঢোকার চেষ্টা করছে। আমার প্রিন্সিপাল অলরেডি ঢুকেও গেছেন।
ঠিক আছে, আমি আছি, আমি তো বাড়ি থেকেই আছি।
আচ্ছা, ওকে স্যার, ওকে স্যার,
ওকে, থ্যাংক ইউ, আছি আমি।
ওকে স্যার, থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার। নমস্কার স্যার, ব্রায়ান স্যার, নমস্কার। নমস্কার নমস্কার, ভালো আছেন?
কেমন আছেন? হ্যাঁ, ভালো আছি, খুব ভালো আছি।
আচ্ছা, আমিও ভালো আছি স্যার।
আচ্ছা,
তাহলে আমরা জয়েন করে, আপনি যখন জয়েন করে গেছেন তাহলে আমরা প্রোগ্রামটা স্টার্ট করে দিতেই পারি আর কি।
নিশ্চয় করুন।
নমস্কার।
নমস্কার,
কেমন আছেন?
আমি তো চমৎকার আছি স্যার, আপনি কেমন আছেন বলুন?
খুব ভালো আছি। একটু দেরি হয়েছে, ক্ষমা।
না, এমন কিছু দেরি হয়নি। বাঙালি এর চেয়ে তাড়াতাড়ি শুরু করাটা, আপনি নিশ্চিন্ত থাকুন, ঠিক সময় হতে চলেছে। খুব বেশি হলে 10 মিনিট লেট হবে।
হ্যাঁ, ঠিক আছে, থ্যাংক ইউ। কত লোক আছে?
স্যার এখনো 102 জন জয়েন করেছেন আর কি। রেজিস্ট্রেশন অ্যারাউন্ড 700.
700?
and another parallel session through YouTube live is going on.
Very good. That's excellent.
So just we will wait for another 2 to 3 minutes and we will start.
That's fine.
Okay, sir.
I will have one PowerPoint I will present. I think I can, when it's my turn, I can present that on the Google.
Okay, sir. No problem. No problem.
Okay.
Sir. I heard you, sir, 2 days ago in Tamralipto College.
How
I
was
was
the
there.
quality? Was the quality okay?
And that was fine. That was fine. Fine.
You could hear the sound was good?
Yes, sound is better. Better.
Oh, good, good. So many people, excellent.
সুদীপ, আমরা কি শুরু করতে পারি নাকি? প্রিন্সিপাল স্যার
চলে এসেছেন, দেখে নাও একবার।
হ্যাঁ,
অভিনন্দা রেডি আছে কিনা?
যদি হ্যাঁ, অভিনন্দাও আছে আর আমার প্রিন্সিপাল স্যারও আছেন আর কি।
ওটা সায়ন্তন প্রবাবলি।
না
না, বলছি যে জাস্ট এখন 108 জন, তো যা 7:33 পাঁচেক হোল্ড করা গেলে ভালো হতো বোধ হয়।
শুরু করে দেওয়া, নাহলে ওদিকে দেরি হবে, কারণ
আমরা স্টার্টটা করে দিই, ততক্ষণে ওরা ঢুকতে থাকুক আর কি।
হ্যাঁ, প্রিন্সিপাল স্যার স্টার্ট করে দিন, কারণ ওদিকে ইউটিউব লাইভ চলছে, তো ফলে অনেক পার্টিসিপেন্ট ওদিকে আছে, আপনার এদিকে হয়ে যাবে।
ঠিক আছে।
অভিনন্দা।
Subhas sir, do I start?
হ্যাঁ,
এক মিনিট।
Very good evening to everyone present here, to all our participants, our respected colleagues, our principal, and most of all to all the participants and those who have come here to listen. Thank you for being part of this program that we have tried to organize. So I formally welcome you to the one-day international webinar on revisiting Vidyasagar, Humanism, Rationality, and Women's Emancipation, organized by Chandidash Mahavidyalaya by the Departments of Political Science and History. To begin with, we shall start with an inaugural song by Rima Ghosh and Anuradha Dhara. Are you here, Rima and Anuradha?
Yeah, ma'am.
Okay, please start.
ধন্য তুমি বিদ্যাসাগর, ধন্য তোমার জ্ঞান, বঙ্গ তুমি ধন্য তুমি বিদ্যা, ধন্য তোমার জ্ঞান, বরঙ্গ মাতার তুমি ধন্য সুসন্তান, জ্ঞানে উড়লে বিদ্যাদান, জ্ঞানের আলো দিলে তুমি করলে বিদ্যাদান, ধন্য তুমি ভারত ভূমি গর্বের সন্তান, ধন্য তুমি বিদ্যাসাগর, ধন্য তুমি ধন্য সুশাসিত মানুষের তুমি যত বিধবার তুমি আর মানুষের তুমি আশ্রয় ভরসা, যত আর তুমি পরম পরিত্রাতা, করুণা গর্বর ধন্য তোমার দান করুণা সাগর বিদ্যাসাগর ধন্য তোমার
হ্যাঁ আমি স্যার ঢুকছি, আমাদের ইন্টারন্যাশনাল আছে, আমার ওয়েলকাম অ্যাড্রেস।
তুমি আকাশ
হ্যাঁ আমি ঢুকে যাবো স্যার। হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ
বাতাসে তোমার
ধন্য তুমি বিদ্যাসাগর ধন্য তোমার জ্ঞান বঙ্গমাতার গর্ভে তুমি ধন্য সুসন্তান বাংলা ভাষা ও বাংলা কৃষ্টি আজ ক্ষত বিক্ষত আমরা ভুলেছি তোমার শেখানো ভাষা ভালোবাসা ব্রত বাংলার তুমি বীর সন্তান ব্যক্তি দারুণ বাংলার তুমি বীর সন্তান ব্যক্তি দারুণ ব্যথিতের মনে কোমল পরশ দয়ার শতরূপ ব্যথিতের মনে কোমল পরশ দয়ার শতরূপ ধন্য তুমি বিদ্যাসাগর ধন্য তোমার জ্ঞান বঙ্গমাতার গর্ভে তুমি ধন্য সুসন্তান ধন্য সুসন্তান। নমস্কার।
তোমার জ্ঞান বঙ্গ সুসন্তান। থ্যাংক ইউ।
Thank you so much, Rima and Anuradha, for that beautiful rendition and for giving us a wonderful start to this program. I would now want to invite our respected principal, Dr. Sheikh Ataur Rahman, to present to us the welcome note. Sir.
Thank you, Madam Abhinanda. Good evening, first of all, good evening, everybody. I am very much delighted and honored to welcome you all in this webinar, web platform. First of all, on behalf of organizing committee, as well as all members of my college, I most respectfully welcome our key speaker, Professor Brian A. Hatcher, Professor and Packard Chair of Theology, Department of Religion, Tufts University, Melbourne of USA. We have with us Professor Ashokendra Sengupta, retired professor and HOD of the Department of Physics of Vidyasagar College, Kolkata, and also former chairperson of West Bengal Commission for Protection of Child Rights. My warm welcome you, sir, to be present here as a speaker and as a resource person. Then I wholeheartedly welcome all of the participants, including my colleagues and friends and other teachers and dignitaries from other institution or organization. My heartiest welcome to all of the students of my college and all other colleges too. Sir, I would like to express my happiness to have you all in this discussion, to get your valuable concepts, ideas, interpretation, and evaluation on Vidyasagar. We know that Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar was born on 26th of this September in just 200 years back into a Hindu Brahmin family in a very rural belt, Birsingham, which is very much adjacent to my native village in East Midnapur of West Bengal. It is a celebration and remembrance in this bicentennial year 2020 and to relook at his life and exercises as a great thinker, philosopher, philanthropist, incredible social reformer, donor, and also a man of the great humanist compassion, and a key figure in Bengal Renaissance. It is an effort to examine Vidyasagar's commitment to Indian culture, social transformation, like widow marriage and some other sort of exercises, and also to spread it among the participants and all other people attended in this platform. We know in 19th century's Bengal, there are two figures who offer an interesting study. In contrast, are Ram Mohan and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. In work, both are very much closely related, associated, but end is very much likewise by the then so-called Hindu orthodoxy. But uniqueness of Vidyasagar lies to understand the painful effort in the then contemporary Hindu society and culture, but just bypassing religion. In this perspective, I think and hope on Vidyasagar 200th birth anniversary and their revisit would certainly focus as to how social reform can be conducted, bypassing religion, and make us progressive thereby. With these few words, I conclude my short welcome and inaugural address and wish that all the discussion in the coming session will certainly be known something which are still unknown about Vidyasagar. I congratulate all the members of the organizing team for such a great effort, and a special thank to Dr. Subhash Singh Roy, HOD of the Department of Political Science, and Dr. Sudip Narayan Maitro, HOD of the Department of History, for conducting and leading this wonderful task. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir, so much for that welcome note. And I would now like to invite Dr. Subhash Singh Roy, IQAC coordinator and head of the Department of Political Science of our college, to present the theme speech. Sir?
Okay, thank you, Ovironda. It is a customary practice to say a few words in the form of theme speech, and that customary practice in this webinar falls upon me, and I'm a little bit scared about to say something before the authority, the two legends, Professor Brian and Ashokendu Sengupta, to say anything about Vidyasagar. It is a very scary job for me. Anyway, let me introduce the theme, why we have chosen this topic. Me and my friend Dr. Sudip Narayan Mitra, after discussion, concluded that the title of the webinar will look like this: Revisiting Vidyasagar, Rationality, Humanity, Woman Emancipation. And why we have chosen this? We keep the two things in mind. One is the 19th century Bengal was submerged in superstitions, religious bigotry, or religious fundamentalism, the dominance of the priests and irrationality. So many social ills and evils there were in 19th century. And from that social ills and evils, the person like Vidyasagar tried to uplift our society. And still we are also facing all these vices and all these negative ideas, negative practices in our society too. Keeping all these things, we have decided that it is better to go for Vidyasagar, to revisit him on these three pertinent issues, or three pertinent or fundamental values upon which a progressive society is to be built upon. In this auspicious year, we wanted to revisit Vidyasagar not only for his bicentenary birthday observation, But we think that the ideals for which he continued his struggles throughout his life need to be cultivated again and again in our present day society. The ideals of the rationality, humanity, and equality that a progressive society aspires to achieve are not fully realized or yet to be fully realized till today. 19th century Bengal was immersed under the dark spell of superstitions, religious dictators, illiteracy, and irrational thought, gross violation of humanity, abject neglect of woman. Irrational thinking captured the public minds. Society was chained by social ills and diseases like illiteracy, child marriage, polygamy, throwing baby into the sea, and the dominance of caste classes. No liberal and national thinking was allowed. Stray attempts were made but did not yield expected results. Vidyasagar, armed with this weapon of rationality, humanism, and respect for women, made a virulent attack on the dormant society, tried to awaken the Bengalis. He is that person who realized that the efficacy of the education, social progress can only be possible if the mass is educated. True emancipation of a woman depends on her education. He prioritized mass education and rational thinking. With the help of the government and on his own initiative, he established schools in several parts of Bengal. He wrote lots of books to fill the gap of school book scarcity. He is also regarded as a living legend of humanism. Here I would like to mention that another medical Bengali poet Chandidas, after whose name our college is named, propounded the idea of humanism. সবার উপর মানুষ সত্য তাহার উপর নয়. Vidyasagar was also known as Karuna Sagar. Though Rabindranath Tagore did not want him to be remembered by that name, but by his exemplary works towards the emancipation of our society. Ajeo Paurush Akhay Manushatva. Today, our society is not free from all the vices, irrationality, inhuman behavior, and violence against women. Irrational activities and propaganda are being circulated. Inhuman behavior is regularly seen in our society in various forms and names. Gross neglect of human values during COVID-19 pandemic we witnessed. Violence against women is our daily routine. Starting from our family to the larger public arena, we witness gross violation. We still cannot make our society a safe place for them. 10 years ago, we used to see every 54 minutes a Bengali serial যার নাম ছিল প্রতি 54 মিনিট আপনারা যারা দেখেছেন তারা নিশ্চয়ই খেয়াল করতে পারবেন was a Bengali serial which was as per record of that time a woman starting from 6 months baby to 79 years old nun was raped in every 54 minutes. Even child marriage and child mother are not a rare scene in rural areas. In this backdrop, we thought that we should revisit Vidyasagar to get our prescription. To repair our society, we need to get some lessons from Vidyasagar. This webinar wants to serve twine purposes. At the same time, a modest tribute to the greatest soul of our Bengali society, and to find out certain prescriptions to make our society qualitatively better. Keeping this in mind, we invited two resource persons to deal with the values of rationality, humanism, and woman emancipation, around which Vidyasagar laid his life. I will not stretch my speech, but I cannot resist my temptation to recite a poem very relevant for today's India. মানুষের লাগি ঈশ্বর তুমি করেছো কতই কাজ, বিধবা বিবাহ নারী শিক্ষা মানুষ ভোলেনি আজ। পাথরে খোদাই মূর্তি ছেড়ে জাগো তুমি আজ ঈশ্বর, জাগাও তুমি মানুষকে আজ, হও তুমি চিরভাস্বর। শুধু দুশো নয় জানি যে সবাই, হাজার বছর পরে তোমার নামে জ্বলবে প্রদীপ বাঙালির ঘরে ঘরে। Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to say a few words in the form of team speech. And with this, I again welcome the two brilliant resource persons to deliver it upon the issues of rationality, humanism, and women emancipation. Thank you so much. Obinanda.
Thank you, Shubhasta. It is perhaps apt for me to say here that as important as today's topic is, but also that a vote of thanks perhaps at the beginning is deserved by you and Professor Moitro for conceiving of such an idea, because it is important that we carry on these traditions in our hearts, and both of you have been wonderful models for the rest of us in the college to follow. So thank you for your heartfelt dedication to organizing something like this. Now moving on to the next part and the most important part of this program today. I would now like to invite Professor Ashokendu Sengupta, who is the retired head of the Department of Physics at Bidhannagar College, Kolkata, and who has also been the former chairperson of the West Bengal Commission for the Protection of Child Rights. A renowned educationist, we are honored to have Sir with us here. So, sir, over to you, Professor Sengupta. Can you hear me, sir?
Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Can you hear
Yes, sir.
me?
Yes, sir. We
Okay.
can see you and hear you. Thank you, sir.
Good evening, everybody. I had an idea that this seminar is a webinar, rather, is going to be held in bilingually, but both Ovinanda and Subhash Babu and the principal had taken English as their medium. So I'll try my best to speak in English. In some cases, if
You can continue in Bengali too, bilingual form. You can also. It is your liberty, sir.
As required, I will try my best. The today's topic is revisiting Vidyasagar, but it may so happen that I may move to other topics as well. So let me discuss Vidyasagar in the light of education policy, NEP to 2020. First of all, I would request you to accept my heartfelt congratulations for organizing such a huge seminar. I have already seen that 139 has joined it and heard it that about 700 are waiting outside. I'm really grateful to the organizers for giving me such an opportunity to speak on Vidyasagar. My heartfelt thanks to all of them, including students, and of course to Professor Brian Hatcher, my co-speaker. Especially I am thankful to Professor Sudip Moitro, who contacted me first. I am thankful to the principal of this college for providing me an excellent infrastructure, and also to Ovinanda Chakraborty for his beautiful introduction. Now, since there is Professor Hatcher with me as co-speaker, who is an authority, about Vidyasagar because of his scholarly studies and researches for decades, I leave it to respected Professor Hatcher to dwell upon Vidyasagar's life and works in details. Last year, I got a chance to visit Birshinga, neighboring place of the principal's own native village. I heard it. There I found, with Birshinga, I found the same school established by Ishwar Chandra and the boarding school along with one public library. The idea of boarding school was there in Right to Education Act also, into Right to Education Act 2009 and NPE 2020. The fact Vidyasagar came out openly to help needy students who need hostel facilities almost free of cost. In his metropolitan schools also, he strictly disallowed corporal punishment. That corporal punishment of students by teachers, that is banned also in RT Act 2009. It may be noted that Swami Vivekananda ji also acted as principal of this institution for a brief period. It is very unfortunate to note that NEP 2020, the idea of public library is practically dropped and replaced by digital library. Digital library is not so easy thing to construct. What we had, the public library system, that is going to ruin, that is practically ruined, and with this NEP 2020, this is going to be totally ruined. Now today, during this revisit, I may be allowed to have a close look at the NEP 2020. Vidyasagar was the most important educationist of his time, and it will be appropriate. It will be appropriate to look at this contemporary education policy while remembering him. But frankly speaking, I fail to understand what N stands for. Is it new? Earlier, there were two declared government education policies of 68 and 86, and that has been recognized also in the policy document, though no reasons were assigned why these policies were discarded. We, while revisiting Vidyasagar, we find that almost every point was there in Vidyasagar's policy on education, except the digitization issues. Digitization issues, except the digitization issues, everything is there. The government might have reasons to become interested with the results of online education, and has taken advantage of fourth industrial revolution. The SDG Goal 4, you know, SDG Sustainable Development Goal 4, demands the students must be instructed properly in the numeracy, etc. And the government is to achieve universal literacy through digital tools only. And government has to follow that, being a partner of this global market. Now the question of taking advantage of fourth industrial revolution didn't arise at Vidyasagar's time, you know, because people didn't even dream of it, the fourth industrial revolution, I mean. And as far as online education is concerned, one may only say that this government might have lost sight of the clauses of UNCRC, United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, Child Labor Act, Right to Education Act, etc., and have probably lost its connection with masses, especially the rural masses. How many houses have digital access in rural India? We do not know. Nobody knows. We cannot say this against Vidyasagar. We know Vidyasagar, a true national leader, never lost his rural connection. Pandemic is not new. Pandemic, we are afraid of pandemic. Indeed, for that matter, we are holding this webinar, and all such activities are through net system. But pandemic is not a new event to this subcontinent. Even at the time of Vidyasagar, we saw the presence of cholera, malaria, which is known as Bardhaman Jor. Further, one may please note that Kasturirangan Committee recommended, on which this NEP 2020 is based. This committee, Kasturirangan Committee, recommended that the jurisdiction of Right to Education Act be expanded to make it meaningful under the NEP 2020, but the government didn't accept it. Now, if N stands for national, that means if it is national education policy, it's really difficult to accept it because it's not inclusive. After all, at least 16 crores of Indian nomadic people were excluded from the domain of this policy. The proposal for cluster schools has ruined the idea of neighborhood schools. You know, neighborhood schools have been proposed by Kothari, D.S. Kothari, in his Kothari Commission's report. Despite the presence of millions of special child children, that is CWSN, child with special needs. The NEP 2020 remained silent over it. So we cannot say it's new or it's national. Anyway, in the preamble of NEP 2020, we see that they have claimed to produce and implement a policy that will help create a new generation of responsible Indian citizens who will certainly respect traditional Indian culture, will fight for democratic values, etc. But we may note that Vidyasagar does not belong to that Sanatan Bharat culture. NEP 2020 didn't care to mention his name or names of Jyotiba Phule or Sir Syed Ahmed. But is this policy anyway different from Vidyasagar's motto? Again, I must say, certainly not. Most importantly, to understand the foresightedness of Vidyasagar, let us look at the major goals or features of NEP 2020. It is, to develop scientific temper, to spread education through mother tongue or regional languages or local languages or spoken languages, and to spend 6% of GDP for education. It is tailored indeed, but that is tailored to suit our discussion. But believe me, I have not altered the policy a bit even. We claim that Vidyasagar's ideas were no different, not ideas alone. He tried sincerely to translate his dreams into reality. Let us examine it. Before moving further, let me ask this question: who this Vidyasagar was? There were many more Vidyasagar down the line, but we are discussing the life and works of one and only one Vidyasagar. He was Ishwar Chandra Sharma. We all know Vidyasagar was a multidimensional personality. He came from a Hindu Brahmin and poor family. These have already been stated by our principal, respected principal. So I am not repeating these things. He was not a prophet, nor did he ever profess anything except culturing his own ideas of education, etc. He was an institution by himself. He had courage. Let us briefly discuss those ideas related to education only. Let me tell you once more that I want to confine myself to the discussion of the contribution of Vidyasagar in building scientific temper and role of our mother tongue in the light of NEP 2020, taking into consideration of the NEP goals. We must admit that motto may be the same, but the circumstances were completely different. Before going further, we must say that his contribution in the field of social reforms, women's emancipation, language and literature, in building scientific temper, etc., were huge. One lecture is not sufficient to cover all aspects. I discussed a few points of this in my book, Onno Porichoye Vidyasagar. Onno Porichoye Vidyasagar. I must not repeat those points here. Vidyasagar did an enormous job in developing scientific temper of his countrymen. But when, look at the time, common Indians do not use Sanskrit or Arabic anymore as their spoken language. They do not know English either. Regional languages are in very poor state, leave alone literature. Indigenous education is on the decline. You may please go through Paramesh Acharya's Bangla Deshojo Shikkadhara. One may also consult writings of Professor Abhijit Pathak, or you may consult Adams' report. There you will find that indigenous education was very rich at that time. The entire Indian society at that time was down with superstitions, and of course they were down with irresponsible, some insincerity. But let us go to the present state. The Indian society were at that time were fully controlled by the dictates of clergymen. What the poor people could do, Vidyasagar took up the challenge. Please follow his steps. He, for the Bengali folks. Further, I request you to note that Bengal was then the nerve center of British India in every sense. He prepared a Bengali primer, Barno Porichoy, despite the presence of another very popular primer, Shishu Shikha, written by his very close friend, Madan Mohan Tarkalankar. We still remember পাখি সব করে রব রাতি পোহাইল ইত্যাদি ইত্যাদি etc. Vidyasagar himself was the publisher of the primer. Still, he took the risk of losing his friend Madan Mohan and money. Also, he took the risk of losing money as publisher. But why? Because Vidyasagar was eager to introduce a straightforward, clear, transparent prose style, close to spoken style, bearing true Bengali flavor, necessary for producing Bengali literature, acceptable to common readers. It is said that Shishu Shikha was written by a Kobi, a poet, and Barno Porichoy was written by a Goddokar, a storyteller. Then where was the reading material? He first introduced a primer, then thought, where is the reading material? Again, Vidyasagar came forward. He took the next step. He translated several pieces of English and Sanskrit works to develop readers' literary senses as well as to build scientific attitude. He, unlike present-day education, did not want a literate person to recognize brands only. This is stated by our former American ambassador to India, that our education is only band recognition education. But Vidyasagar was not in favor of brand recognition education. He wanted good citizen and with analytic minds. But how? Looking at the pieces of text he translated, we may get the answer. He had translated Chambers' biography partly into Jivan Charit. This book briefly depicted life sketches of Newton, Galileo, Copernicus, William Jones, etc. The next problem, not only that, next problem is to choose technical terms in Bengali. He smoothly overcame the challenge with the help of others, including Akhoy Datta, his close friend, by creating appropriate words. Let us give some examples. Padartha Vidya, Udvid Bigyan, Rashayan, Bhugol, Duravikshan Yantro, Anuvikshan Yantro, Jyotish, Jyotish Shastra, Jyotishi Shastra, Gonit, Patigonit, ittadi shabdo. These nowadays we discard a few terms indeed, but most of them are have found favor with us, though these were not enough. It was made clear by Vidyasagar that to build up scientific temper, we need to, one, encourage people to follow the life and works of great scientists, two, use mother tongue to communicate, three, construct proper scientific vocabulary for technical terms in local, regional, and home language. Not only that, he included in the syllabus the value education with the hope that people would follow the rules of justice. NEP 2020 also suggested the use of mother tongue, local, regional, home languages, etc. to communicate at school level. Not a new idea, but it's a good idea indeed. But those who prepared NEP 2020, I'm afraid, are not really aware of the fact that in India, local home language, etc., are not necessarily the mother tongue. In West Bengal alone, though state government is ready with textbooks in Hindi, Urdu, Gorkhali, Santali, still here one cannot guarantee use of mother tongue, home language, etc. as medium of instructions. Local dialects of several ethnic groups may differ. Even among Santhals, there are several ethnic groups. Only the script, Alchiki is common, but the language differs. Apart from Santhals, there are Rava people, there are other people also. So let me say that it's very difficult to arrange language teaching for them in mother tongue only, or local language differs from place to place. Further, Ishwar Chandra understood that to deliver scientific goods in mother tongue, anyway, we are taking mother tongue as the target. But Ishwar Chandra understood that to deliver scientific goods in mother tongue, we need a strong sense of grammar, and we need a command over the language to create vocabulary of scientific terms. Indian educationists from Rabindranath to Satyendranath, Meghnad Shah to Muhammad Saidullah knew that problem, and they started joining hands to prepare appropriate textbooks. After independence, our progressive-minded first premier, Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru, was found to be in favor of by building scientific temper. At the insistence of our leaders, our constitution assured us that the state will endeavor to build scientific temper among its citizens. Though the state failed to pursue this idea, but it was able to encourage states to form committees. Here in Bengal also, there was one Bangla Bhasha Prasar Samiti, you know, to do the job. And more importantly, Mr. Nehru pursued his government to help states to build state book boards to develop proper textbooks in adequate number for students. But remember the word adequate. In physics, I can say with certainty that the Padartha Dharma written by Devi Prasad Rai Chaudhary or one book written by Somarendranath Ghoshal are really exceptional books. But this is not enough for the students. But there is no such initiative visible now. If central government do not encourage states to work in this line, one cannot expect that education can be delivered in mother tongue. And if teachers do not use mother tongue, scientific temper cannot be developed. Vidyasagar made no mistake to understand the importance of teachers and their proper training. Can we expect present rulers to take proper steps to implement NEP 2020? That certainly needs huge budgetary allocation. This government has promised to allocate 6% of GDP. All previous government promised so, but we found that each year government preferred to cut and revise education budget to control fiscal deficits and allow other sectors to thrive. Let's wait and see what happens this time. Frankly speaking, I do not trust the present national leadership. I do not trust those who encouraged miscreants to demolish Vidyasagar statues, but I would be glad to find myself wrong. I have taken much time, isn't it? Anyway, let me conclude now. Vidyasagar felt clearly the importance of English and Sanskrit language to develop Bengali language, and for all pedagogic works, he clearly underlined the importance of proper teachers training apart from adequate number of teachers and schools. He invited government to use Sanskrit college premises as normal school. At that time, you know, normal schools were were established to train teachers. Here lies the uniqueness of his contribution. He was eager to develop Bengali language and literature, and for that matter, supported the introduction of English as medium of instructions. It was the time when rulers were uncertain of introducing English as the medium of instruction, but Ishwar Chandra supported it, the English teaching. It was practically a divided house. A group of Bhadralok came forward in support of English. Vidyasagar also supported that move, but he did it with certain conditions. He categorically mentioned that to make the countrymen aware of the progress of the world and the Europe, the Western world, our people need to know its own language, own culture, own literature, and they must have a scientific bend of mind based on Indian logic system. That's a tall order, but Vidyasagar, being a very stubborn person, was not ready to compromise with others. Referred to the reports of Ballantyne and Vidyasagar's response. In a very gentle but steadfast manner, he opposed Ballantyne's recommendations regarding reforms of syllabus. He didn't hesitate to scrap Berkeley or Shankho or Vedanta philosophy or Hindu Shubhankari or Vedic mathematical system, Shubhankari system, to make way for English and new European philosophy and mathematics. Ishwar Chandra was very much against the idealistic philosophy, and so he unhesitantly scrapped Shankho and Vedanta philosophy. He pursued his own ideas and tried hard to achieve the goals. He was successful to influence many people of rival camps to buy his arguments. Some of them even went to the extent of experimenting it. Lieutenant Governor of Northwestern British India, Mr. Thompson, introduced very successfully Hindi or Urdu as medium of instruction in the area under his jurisdiction. Maybe Vidyasagar copied his idea from him, but certainly the present-day rulers have copied the NEP 2020 in a very unprofessional manner. Anyway, if it helps, we must not hesitate to welcome it. But I have reservation. You may have, or you may not have. Anyway, let us examine it first. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, Professor Sengupta, for that wonderful, enriching deliberation on Vidyasagar. It was enriching on so many aspects and dimensions. Before we move on to our next speaker, there is a small announcement that I would like to make. The questions and observations, if any of our participants have them, we will be taking all questions together at the very end of the session of Professor Hatcher. So please do not unmute your audio, since that disrupts the person who is speaking it. And at the end, those who are moderating this session will be presenting your questions to the respected resource person. Thank you so much. And apart from this, the feedback link will also be presented at the very end of today's seminar. So please do not ask for the feedback link while the sessions are on. Having said that, we will now move on to Professor Brian A. Hatcher. Professor Hatcher is the department chair, Professor, Packard Chair of Theology at Tufts University, USA. He has pursued his education from Carleton College, Yale University, and Harvard University, from where he also has received his doctorate degree. His research interests include Hinduism and religion in modern South Asia, religion and colonialism in especially colonial Bengal. It gives us great pleasure and honor to have Sir with us here. He is one of the most renowned names worldwide in discussions of Hinduism, and he has worked extensively not just on Hinduism as a religion, but also on the significance and role of great stalwarts like Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. It gives me great pleasure to invite Sir Sir, if you can hear me?
Yes, I can, Abhinanda. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you so much, Abhinanda, for that warm and generous welcome. I want to begin with a number of thanks because I'm particularly delighted to be here today with all of you. And when I move to my presentation, you'll see why, in particular, being able to come to Chandidas Mahavidyalaya, even if only virtually, is very meaningful to me. But I begin with a thank you then to our chief patron and principal of the college, Dr. Sheikh Ataur Rahman. Thank you, sir, for patronizing this event in honor of Ishar Chandra Vidyasagar, such an important occasion, this 200th birth anniversary. And of course, thank you to the Department of Political Science and History and to the organizers, Professors Roy and Moitra. Professor Subhash Singha Roy was in touch with me by email, and I instantly agreed to come because I know the importance of Vidyasagar to the Bengali heart and to the Bengali mind and to the progress of India's modernity. So I leap at the chance to be with you today. I want to congratulate and thank Professor Ashok Indu Sengupta for a wonderful speech. I would remind everyone that my degree from Carleton was in chemistry. So I have a deep fondness for science. I know the importance of scientific learning, and I hope we can remember that aspect of Vidyasagar, his ability to translate some important scientific terminology into Bangla to begin the work of making scientific rationality a part of the modern Indian mindset. So thank you, sir, for your remarks and calling attention to the new education policy. I think is extremely important to be thinking about what it includes and perhaps what it does not include, something very important. And in this time of a pandemic that we're all struggling with, the importance of science and being attentive to scientific evidence can't be stressed enough. In both countries, I think we have claims about cures that some of them have scientific merit, but many of them do not. And unless we listen to the scientists about how to prevent the spread of the virus and to ultimately cure the virus, then we will not ever be safe. So science is very important to us. And I wanted to thank the two singers, Rima and Anuradha, for a beautiful song in the beginning, and Abhinanda for hosting this so graciously. So with that, I'll turn to a series of remarks, which I'll present via PowerPoint, and I hope you'll be able to see this. This will make it easier for me to stay on track with my time and hopefully provide you with some visuals. I hope you can hear me and you'll be able to see this. I'll speak slowly if I can so that you can understand my accent. I wish I could speak entirely in Bangla, but Amar Bangla ekটু খারাপ হয়ে গেছে, so I think it's better I stick in English. So please, I'll shift to presentation. And can you see this? I hope you can see this.
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay,
It is
very
visible,
good.
sir.
Okay, very good. So I'll title my remarks today, Vidyasagar's Ethic of Recognition, and I'll make sense of what I mean by recognition there as we move along. Beginning with an image I took at the train station, actually in Karmatar in Jharkhand, where you all know Vidyasagar created a sort of retirement retreat for himself. A wonderful, colorful painting there. This moment is very special to me, as I said, because it offers me a chance to look forward and to look back. And I put up here on the screen the copy of the jacket cover of a reissue of my first book, which I published back in 1996, Idioms of Improvement, my first book on Vidyasagar, which was based on my doctoral dissertation at Harvard. I felt bad that Oxford University Press in India had allowed the book to go out of print. So I approached Primus Books in New Delhi, and they very graciously decided to republish the book. It's been entirely reset with new images and new footnotes and bibliography and a new preface that I've included to bring the book up to date. I hope it will be out by puja time, and I had wished it could be out for the 200th anniversary, but the pandemic proved to be difficult in so many ways. But the bringing out of the book again gave me a chance to look back and think about where I began, and because it's coming out again on the 200th, to think about looking forward, where we can go with the study of Vidyasagar. The book made me think about what I might call my Vidyasagar, and of course I can't in any way claim to own Vidyasagar. For Bengalis, I'm keenly aware, one of my colleagues in Kolkata wrote to me on the 200th to say that his birthday was every Bengali's birthday. And I thought that's a very powerful notion, and I wanted to share that with you today. That in a sense, he gave birth to modern Bengal. He shaped your language, your schools, as we've just heard from Professor Sengupta, your understanding of good work, of honesty, kindness, determination, charity, all these values we can associate with Vidyasagar. And I, being an American, can never make such a claim. I can't feel that kinship that you all feel with him. I feel an immense respect for the man and a profound critical engagement. But of course, I can never own him the way you all do. My story about Vidyasagar has to be somewhat different than all of yours. But it's a big part of my story. I've been spending the better part of my career writing and thinking and translating the works of Vidyasagar. So thinking about Chandidas, Mahavidyalaya, and Birbhum, I would remind you all, I first came to Bengal way back in 1986 to study at Shantiniketan. And so I have a profound sense of connection to the landscape and the people of Birbhum in particular. It's the place I first came to love the soil of Bengal and the water and the trees and the birds and all the culture that goes with it. And it was in that moment, I had come to Shantiniketan thinking I would study Rabindranath Tagore, such a monumental figure in his own right. And surprisingly, when I was shopping in Bolpur one day, I went to a small bookshop and I found this paperback copy. The Varna Porichoy has been mentioned already by Professor Sengupta. Such a powerful, small work. We can say it's just a school book, but it's a transformative work in so many ways. And when I discovered it, it called attention to me to a man about, I'd heard Vidyasagar's name, but I did not know enough about who he was. And in this moment, I began to realize what a tremendous icon of the Bengal Renaissance he was. And this really changed my entire mode of thinking. I decided I would no longer work on Rabindranath Tagore. I would dedicate myself to Vidyasagar. Because I think in Vidyasagar, I saw the possibility, and this is where he becomes my Vidyasagar, and I confess that I have in some sense taken advantage of Vidyasagar's life and legacy to think of a variety of questions, and I put them on the screen for you here. How are we to understand what makes up modern Bengali identity? Well, again, you have to understand Vidyasagar to understand the modern Bengali mindset, sense of values, appreciation of language, commitments to reform and change and reason and progress, etc. In Vidyasagar, then we can rethink entirely this notion of a Bengal Renaissance. And I've written critically about the idea of Renaissance, trying to not take away anything from the powerful moment, but to think again about what was going on in more complicated ways during the 19th century. I also found Vidyasagar compelling as a Brahmin Pundit, for whom Sanskrit and the Shastras were not just a dead letter, but were a living resource. And there was a scholar, Sheldon Pollock, who had argued that Sanskrit died after the 17th century, that there was no active production in Sanskrit after the 17th century, that it had become a dead letter. And I rejected that idea because I thought in someone like Vidyasagar, as other pundits, you see someone very actively using Sanskrit as a live factor for addressing contemporary change. And finally, and this is where I will focus today in my remarks, Vidyasagar was compelling to me because of what he tried to do on behalf of Bengali women and Indian women more generally. This is one of the sub-themes of the webinar today, and I wanted to focus on it because it is so profoundly important about his legacy. But so I guess I'm saying again that I want to recognize that I've put Vidyasagar to work for me, and I've asked him to help me provide evidence for arguments about religion in colonial India, the nature of the experience of living under colonial rule, and to think about the factors that gave birth to what we might think of as modern Hinduism, even if we don't typically include Vidyasagar among those who are the architects of modern Hinduism. His posture vis-a-vis the Sanatana Dharmis and the defenders of Deshachar is an important one in shaping what becomes elements of the modern Hindu mindset. So as I say, I want to focus now thinking on Vidyasagar's efforts to promote the well-being of the Indian woman and Bengali woman in particular. And so I want to help us think in new ways about a question we're all familiar with. We know this aspect of his legacy, but what can we say that might be new, that might open up a new appreciation for a man who's very familiar to us all, but who remains in many ways also compelling for his enigmatic character. And again, if I think of my work as an American scholar, trying to translate South Asian culture to American audiences, I have a sense of humility, and I have a sense of sadness almost that Vidyasagar remains largely unknown amongst my American colleagues, my American friends. Many ordinary Americans will have heard of Vivekananda or Gandhi, Tagore. I heard Tagore's name on the radio just the other day. But you would not likely hear Vidyasagar's name on the radio here. And it makes me sad because such a towering genius, why is he not more well-known outside of India? This is my problem, as it were. It's not your problem. But I continue to work to spread knowledge about Vidyasagar here because I think he remains so vitally important. As I say, you know him so well, and I put up throughout the course of this presentation several images of the Pandit because they are iconic and they speak to the many dimensions of his character. And I think on an occasion like the 200th anniversary, we have a particular challenge to confront. We want to celebrate Vidyasagar. We have every reason to celebrate his legacy. We revere him, we honor him, and we hope to do justice to his memory. But it's also always a good time to ask new questions, to ask, have we missed something? Are we subject to repeating the same thing over and over again about Vidyasagar? Can we say something new? I was fortunate on Saturday, which was the actual birthday, September 26th, to be invited to speak at the Tamralipta Mahavidyalaya. Also had a webinar in the Department of History. And for that occasion, I chose to speak around this persistent question. Vidyasagar ki Nastik chilen. Was Vidyasagar a Gnostic? And if he was a Gnostic, what does that mean? This question is one of those questions that won't go away. It keeps coming up. What was Vidyasagar's religious attitudes? And I won't dwell on this here, but my point is, it's a very familiar question, but I think it remains one about which there's more to say. We can come up with new answers about that. So I believe that webinar will be put online forever. It was recorded, so you'll be able to see it at some point. I won't dwell on that. Instead, I'll shift to today. And as I said, speak to you about Vidyasagar's work on behalf of Hindu women. And I want to zero in, because time is short, and I want to leave time for discussion, to zero in on what I consider to be the key thrust of all his arguments across a range of works. And this is his Vidava Vibaho, of course, Bala Vibaho, Dosh, Bahu Vibaho, all of these reform tracts, of course, but also in other works, Shrikar Banavash, as you'll see. This one word that comes to my mind is he's pressing for us to recognize the role, the place of women amongst us. He wants us to see women. I think in some sense, Vidyasagar felt women had become invisible in his day. And because they were invisible, they were subject of abuse and neglect and pain and suffering. And this troubled him. And he thought all it would require was for Bengalis to recognize the women around them. To make sense of this, I'll take a quote from a feminist scholar to think about what's at stake here. Nancy Fraser, a well-known feminist philosopher, has said that institutionalized patterns of cultural value constitute some actors as inferior, excluded, wholly other, or simply invisible, hence as less than full partners in social interaction. And if this happens, then we should speak of misrecognition and status subordination. This is exactly, I believe, what Vidyasagar understood. And it troubled him, it pained him. We know about his, the heart of a Bengali mother, right? He had the heart of someone who felt the pain of the misrecognition, the status subordination, and the near invisibility of the Bengali woman. You may consider the very first tract that he wrote in opposition to child marriage, Bala Vivah Dosh, right? From 1850, he was still quite a young man, writing this for the Sharbha Shubakari Shabha, right? An essay very different from his later reform writings because it's a rationalistic, almost sociological approach, quasi-scientific approach to understanding why child marriage is bad for children, both the boys and the girls. But I think in here, he had a particular sensitivity to what happened to young Bengali women when they were cast into marriage. And if we look at Bala Vivah Dosh, and we just focus in on some language here, and I've highlighted kind of crudely on this scan. I apologize for the quality here. It's a bit distorted. But from the very beginning of the work, he talks about what the Shastras say about giving 8-year-old girls, 10-year-old girls, etc., in marriage. And he uses this idea that people act on these shastric injunctions, this Shruti Shastra Patipadito Kalpato Phala Mrigatushnai, right? That they're deluded, mugda, by the delusion offered by the Shastras about certain kinds of rewards that would come or penalties that might follow if the Shastras aren't adhered to. And he says, Manushumatri, he says, everybody gets this. We all understand it. We all understand how far the harm goes when we begin to give children in marriage. And so he's basically asking why, if we see this, why don't we do something about it? Why don't we recognize this when it's happening right around us? So again, it's sort of visible but invisible at the same time. When we know this, why doesn't the custom change? I think if we jump ahead to Vidhava Vivaho from 1855, he tells us again, and he again uses a similar kind of concept. The problem has to do with delusion. And he cries out to the people of India here, Bharat Varshio Manavagun, Arakotokal Tomra Moha Nidrai Abhibhuta Hoya. How long will you be overcome by delusion? Lying on your bed of delusion, right? How long will you stay? Why don't you just open your eyes and see things as you should? So again, why can't we just make this problem visible? Of course, this is the compelling cry of a work that made him famous, probably the single most important work to make him famous around the world as the great social reformer, Vidhava Vivaho Prachaladaho Uchivkina, right? This from 1855. And of course, it's what thrust him into the flames of controversy. I show on the right-hand side the artwork of an artist. I asked an American artist who knew nothing about Vidyasagar, but to create some artwork for me to use for a book cover. And he very wisely understood controversy. So we have the flames of controversy. We have Vidyasagar's kind of complicated image in there, and then the verse from Parashara Nashte Mrte Pravrajite Klibecha Padivepatao, right? We know this Sanskrit line that became compelling for Vidyasagar to mount his widow marriage campaign. But it cost Vidyasagar a lot financially and emotionally, and even at the level of familial relations, a very transformative experience, which he would view as the single greatest satkarma of his life, the single greatest good deed he had ever done. Some of you will know, I felt, having written Idioms of Improvement, I confessed in that book that I did not pay attention to Vidova Vivaho in that book because I was focused on issues of Vidyasagar's own upbringing, his training in Sanskrit, his school book pedagogy, about which Professor Ashok Chandru Gupta has spoken. You know, the whole culture in which Vidyasagar produced books like Parnapuri Choi, Bodhodoi, etc. So I felt I needed to return and give due attention to the Vidova Vivaho moment. And I knew that Vidyasagar had completed his own partial translation of the Bengali work, but it struck me that it was partial. So he didn't translate the entire work, and I thought it should be translated in its entirety. And of course, it also was time to think about what he was doing in his translation. So in my translation, you have a complete English version of the Sanskrit and Bengali original with annotations and some attempt to put it in social context. And it's my way to pay homage to this single greatest work that Vidyasagar claimed to have done. So we've seen this line, alas, people of India, for how much longer will you lay prostrate on a bed of delusion? How much longer must this go on? Can't you recognize the women around you? Again, you see him in the conclusion, the Upashanhar of the Vidova Vivaho, Book 2, saying that Chakku Karna Vishishta Bhakti Matrei Shikar Korben, anyone with eyes and ears has to acknowledge, right? Anyone who is alive and breathing and can see the world has to confess to the enormous harm that befalls women when they are widowed at a young age. Now, his Shastra trades on some anxieties about women who would become widowed might be led into paths of prostitution or take up the practice of abortion. And I think we have to forgive him for using what I think are kind of something like scare tactics. This was an age in which women were very severely controlled, kept in the home, and the subject of a great deal of masculine shame. So the idea that women would stray down the path of prostitution was a horrific idea in the moment. And he may have traded on it in order to scare his readers. But his goal was, all right, if you're worried about that, then why do you consign them to a fate in which they have no options, in which they can no longer be married and happily accompanied by a partner through the rest of their life? So I find it an unfortunate tactic that he uses at the end of the book to speak of Babichar and Brunata and all of that. But I think we can understand what he was strategically attempting to do here. So I want to say that in Vidyasagar there is a clear and consistent quest to promote the recognition of women in Bengali society. And I have argued that it kind of runs like a red thread through a lot of his work, not just the reform tracts. But the problem of recognition is at the heart of Bhranti Bilash. If you think about the Bangla recreation of Shakespeare's play, Comedy of Errors, it's actually a delightful play on mistaken identity, right? Where these two people are confused for one another. The entire story is about misrecognition, failing to see someone for what they are. I found that striking that he would choose that play of all the Shakespeare plays to translate. Why? Because he was delighted to see that it traded on this very problem of people failing to see things correctly. Who is who? Sita Ranavas, the same thing. We have the terrible plight of Sita, who's banished by Rama even after her faithful allegiance to him, and somehow has to be recovered only through an act of self-abnegation. I've written in my second book on Vidyasagar on the right here, how even Vidyasagar's own life story is rich with themes of recognition, in particular, the recognition of suffering and the role of women in alleviating suffering, most especially that of his father when Thakur Das was living in Kolkata and was on the merest margins of poverty. Many of you will recall the story from Vidyasagar Charito, where Thakur Das is in the city, he's run out of money, he's about to sell his last water pot. He has no money left, and he encounters a kind widow who feeds him. And Vidyasagar tells us that when he heard this heart-rending story, it kindled an unbearable blaze of sorrow in my heart, matched in intensity only by the profound respect for women it engendered in me. So in some sense, and I think many other people have written about this, that moment was quintessential for him as a young man in recognizing what was noble and beautiful about the Bengali woman, but what was tragic about her invisibility in society. And so I think that crystallizes in many senses his quest to promote the recognition of the Hindu woman. I've written an essay on this, and I also discuss it in my book. I call this the Shakuntala paradigm, because the other great drama that Vidyasagar recreates in Bengali is, of course, Kalidasa's drama, Shakuntala, Abhigyana Shakuntalam. And what is the Shakuntala story about, except love, forgetfulness, the act of recognition, and then the restoration of a couple who've been parted through a loss of memory, through the failure to recognize someone for whom they are. So Shakuntala here on the left, longing for her husband, Dushanta, who goes away and because of the curse forgets who she is, forgets that he's married to her, and even when confronted by his own wife, doesn't recognize her for his wife, does not recognize her, only until the ring is produced and the token, the abhijnana, right, that allows the recognition to take place. Can the restoration happen? Can the couple be reunited? I think, again, why did Vidyasagar choose this drama of all dramas to focus his attention on? I think he was moved by this moment of recognition. What struck me most profoundly when I was translating Vidova Vivaho was that Vidyasagar published his Shakuntala around the same time as he was working on Vidova Vivaho. So we imagine him writing about the Shastric grounds for widow marriage, why it was legitimate according to the Dharma Shastras, and at the same time he's thinking about Kalidasa's story of Shakuntala. This is when I had something of a eureka moment and saw what I think Vidyasagar was hoping we would see, which is the problem of recognition. And so I would call this an ethic of recognition. And I just took this slide here. It's actually Vidyasagar as a boy with his father Thakur Das from this wonderful relief work at Badurbagan, at the house in Badurbagan. But the treatment of the vision, the gaze, the eyes here in this artwork is very powerful. It's about two people seeing one another. This is what an ethic of recognition is about. It's about seeing the other for who they are. And I think this is something that Vidyasagar deserves enormous credit for. It's why we think of him as a Doyasagar, right? So if we take this ethic of recognition and we apply it to what we already think about Vidyasagar, perhaps it helps us think of him in new ways. Yes, he was a Vidyasagar. He was an ocean of learning, but that learning was focused on taking texts like Shakuntala, Shakespeare, the Dharma Shastras, and putting them to work to do things like help us see the world in new ways. He was a Karuna Sagar, an ocean of compassion, because as he said when he heard the story of his father, his heart was filled with sorrow when he heard that pitiful tale. This also led him to be a Doyasagar, someone to act out of mercy and kindness towards other people, and to become an Abalabandhu, a friend of the weak. And here it's unfortunate that the woman is described as without power, powerless. But he was the friend of the powerless. And if women were powerless, it was his job to find a way to give them a measure of power by making them visible in society. And I think just looking today at all the young women and the faculty women who are here on this webinar and thinking about where women in India have come today, to some degree, we have to thank Vidyasagar for opening up the possibilities for women to have new roles in public life and to have new kinds of relationships with men and to live in the world in a way in which they could not do when he was a young man. So it's something for us to pause and consider. And on that, I think it's only fair to say, long live Vidyasagar. So thank you. I'll close my presentation there and look forward to any commentary. Thank you again.
Thank you, sir. Saying thank you would be belittling. So instead, I suppose it'll be better, sir, if we could move on to some of the questions, sir, that we have received, since you also were talking about interaction. So we have received already 2 questions, which I would read out to you, sir. The first question to Professor Brian Thatcher is, how do we re-establish the ideas of Vidyasagar during this present time? What did he think about British rule at that time? So this question is by Shoikot Bishash.
Yes, it's a very important question, and I thank the poser of it for raising it. And it's, of course, a question that has led Vidyasagar to be, in some moments, particularly in the Naxal movement of the 1970s, to be criticized, perhaps being too close to British rule, being something of a comprador, someone who was comfortable working with the British. I think that's simplistic. I think it's too simplistic to say he wanted to work with the British. I think we have plenty of evidence, and I write about this in my second book, of his attempts to push back against the arrogance and the authority of the British. In the famous episodes with Principal Carr of the Hindu College, putting his feet on his desk and insulting Vidyasagar. Vidyasagar did not take that lying down. He returned the favor in kind and really, we could say, got the better of the principal on a moral ground, showed him the weakness of his own arrogance. In that sense, I see in Vidyasagar a kind of a precursor to Mahatma Gandhi. And it's worth remembering that Gandhi wrote a small tribute to Vidyasagar. He had read Chandicharan Mandopadaya's, or Subhal Chandra Mitra, perhaps, biography of Vidyasagar, and he was quite moved by the example of Vidyasagar standing up to the British. But we have to understand that in the 1850s, prior to the rebellion in particular, the understanding amongst many Indian reformers like Vidyasagar was that for change to come, the British were an opportunity through the new legal system to enact beneficial legislation. So we don't necessarily have to fault him. We have to admire his, if you could say, strategic knowledge and wisdom to see that there was an opportunity using the British legal system to enact laws which would actually benefit Hindu women. So it's a complicated question. I have no doubt that, you know, on any occasion when he would speak privately, I'm sure he expressed himself quite clearly on the failings of the British, and we have plenty of anecdotes about that. But he was a public servant for many years, and he had the savoir-faire, we can say, to take advantage of that situation in order to promote what he thought were beneficial changes. I hope that answers the question, or at least addresses it.
Right,
Hello,
sir.
madam.
So then there is another question, sir, and this is by Naomi Vichara. Her question is, if his texts portray recognition, then what was his take on the flesh and blood women of his time? Did he believe in giving them recognition? Perhaps his contemporary women she is asking about.
Yes, I think he did. Absolutely. And if you read The wonderful thing about Vidyasagar is he's an excellent storyteller. We know this. He's constantly telling stories, sometimes telling quite humorous stories. But even in the middle of his reform tracts, he will drop in a story. And if you read the Bahu Vivaho literature, every now and then he'll throw in a story. And I remember one occasion where he speaks of meeting young women who had been married in the system of Kulin polygamy. And they're telling him about the pains they felt because of what happens to young girls like them, married away to men who sometimes take a dozen wives and facing the almost certain future of young widowhood and just neglect. And he tells these stories, I think, because he wants his readers to see and feel the pain of these women. So yes, I think he recognized it very keenly and worked at that strategic level, at the level of enacting legislation. Now, Bahu Vivaho as a campaign did not work, did not succeed, but it brought a lot of attention to a problem that would become one in which change would come over time. So yes, now maybe the person asking the question is, there's a legitimate reason to ask. Well, his own wife perhaps didn't learn to read and did not develop the skills that he was promoting in the public sphere. So it's the case that he was a man of his time and would have more than likely not been able to do everything we might have hoped he could have for every woman in his life. But I think at the level of social change, he very much wanted Bengalis to recognize the women in their lives.
So, great. In fact, last day, about a couple of seminar in the day, and it was mostly a student seminar. There was one student who spoke at length about the role that his mother played in his formation, in the formation of his ideals, and how she was the ideal kind of woman that he sort of modeled his ideas on, and how she taught him the virtues of compassion. Attitude he had towards his contemporary. So, another question, I think, the last question we have received.
I'm having trouble hearing. The sound has become bad. Can you? The sound is becoming broken.
Yes, so that happens when the participants they turn on their videos or their audios. Is it audible? Yes.
Right now, yes.
So
right now, yeah.
Yes. So there's another question here, sir. Somebody asking. This would be Urmi Shannal asking, how can the ideals of Vidyasagar be spread in this contemporary context in our times? How they can find renewed relevance, perhaps?
Well, I think one answer is you're looking at it right here today. We have some 130 or so participants on a webinar. And Professor Sengupta mentioned the move towards digital in the national education policy. And I think digital is a mixed sword, mixed blessing, if you will. Here is one of its powers, is that we can gather people from many locations in one moment. Here I sit in Boston, Massachusetts, and I can be with you in Birbhum, and we can talk about Vidyasagar, and we can then go out we can close our Zoom accounts and walk out our doors and talk about Vidyasagar to our friends and our neighbors. So here we're doing one thing already, which is promoting awareness of him. So I would hope, and I've been looking and waiting to see what publications will come. I would like to see the government of West Bengal produce perhaps new Rationality, collected essays will be required. We need continually for scholars and public intellectuals to think and write and speak about the legacy of the man so that he's not forgotten. Professor Sengupta also mentioned the destruction of the Murti at Vidyasagar College in 2019. That was a tragic moment, an unfortunate moment in which the impulses of politics came and thrust themselves against the memory of a man who deserved far better than that. And I wrote a piece for Scroll.in on that very theme. The blessing in that context was that it called attention to Vidyasagar again. And I think from some of the comments you saw from some politicians revealed the degree to which people do not know what Vidyasagar's legacy is. Some people confuse Vidyasagar with Ram Mohan Roy. Some people think Vidyasagar is the one who outlawed Shatidako. So that speaks to the need to continue to educate through writing, through publications, through speaking, through the collection of his works. And I would think thirdly, perhaps through the creation of NGOs and public organizations that commit themselves to doing the good work of spreading vernacular education, taking care of the poor, the needy, the sick. You know, we have a pandemic now. I wrote a short piece for a little magazine, should be coming out soon, on Vidyasagar or Atimari and the pandemic. Because we know, as has been mentioned already, Burdwanjor, we know how he responded to famines and malaria outbreaks. He was there on the front lines. In America, we have this phrase, I don't know if you use it in India, first responder, to talk about the medical technicians, the ambulance drivers, the firefighters, the policemen who go first off to help people in need. I think Vidyasagar was a first responder. And that bears, I think, highlighting and celebrating. But people may not know that about him. They may think of him, I think many people see him as, his image is, to some people, kind of frightening. He's a dour Sanskrit pundit. They think, oh, he must have been very severe and stern and disciplinarian and perhaps lost in his books, but we know him to be far more complicated than that. So I would like to say, back to the question of digital, Vidyasagar loved his books. He cared deeply for his library. His books mattered to him, and libraries in general mattered to him. And so I hope that libraries, even as we move to a digital moment, libraries as physical spaces for people to come and pull books off the shelf, sit at a desk, read them with other people around. I hope that won't be lost. I hope we can preserve the library. Bengal has so many wonderful libraries, Uttar Public Library, the National Library, the Bangir Sahitya Parishad, all these libraries that I've had the privilege of working in. They're such important spaces for the promotion of learning and the cohesion of society that would be a wonderful way to acknowledge Vidyasagar, would be by lavishing more money and more attention on all the libraries, from the smallest to the largest.
Right, sir. I think so. We women, as you said in your lecture, that the female faculty members or participants who are present here, we ourselves are living examples of what this man has done for us. Perhaps it is time that we give back something in return. The recognition that he talked about, it is high time we renew that recognition that is due to him, perhaps. And I think more than any other ideal in this century, in this time, it is the virtue of humanity that requires to be reinstituted in us, perhaps. There's one last question, so we'll just take one last. There's one by Amit Thakur. The first part of the question is, how did you get attracted to Vidyasagar? So I think you've already told us detail about your love for Vidyasagar and how it was born. The second part of the question is, what are the characteristics of Vidyasagar that seem unique to you? So this would be the last question, sir.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes?
May I ask Professor Hatcher a question after this?
Okay. So maybe one last quick question after he's done answering this, if sir is okay with it?
Yes, that's fine. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Please mute yourself for now.
I'm at your service, and it's your schedule. So I know it becomes late in the evening for you there, so I don't want to keep people too late. How did I become interested in Vidyasagar? You've seen my trip to Birbhum and to Bolpur and Shantiniketan, and discovering, I always tell my students in college, and you'll all appreciate this, is that you come to college with a plan to do one thing. You want to become a social psychologist, a biotechnician, you want to become a chemical engineer. But you come to college, I always tell them, to have your mind changed, to discover something you didn't expect to find. And so here I went to Shantiniketan, and I thought I would work on Tagore, and I found Vidyasagar in a sense. I think we have to leave ourselves open to being changed when things happen to us. And just coming across Barnapoy Choi for me was a moment like that. And then, of course, I would routinely go down to Kolkata from Shantiniketan and go to College Street and bookshop and do all those things. And while moving about Kolkata, then I became something of hypersensitive to Vidyasagar's image, and then I would see it painted on the wall, and then I would see him depicted next to Swami Vivekananda, or I would see him with Bankim Chandra on a mural, and I would begin to realize, well, this man was so significant, and why is it that I don't know as much as I should about him? So again, it just reinforced for me the idea that Tagore was already world famous, a figure known throughout the entire world, where Vidyasagar was not. And I thought, okay, particularly when you're looking for a new topic for a dissertation, I thought, well, this would be the right way to go. To the second part of that question, what do I think is distinctive? Well, apart from, I began my training in India with Sanskrit. I did many years of Sanskrit before learning Bangla, which is one of my Bengali teachers said that's why my Bangla is so bad. But but I of course appreciate Vidyasagar as a Sanskrit scholar. But as a human being, the most distinctive thing to me about Vidyasagar is his humility. I can connect this to my comments about recognition. There's so many stories about Vidyasagar, with his characteristic haircut, which made him prone to being mistaken for a coolie or for a bearer from Orissa. He seemed to delight in this. He liked being mistaken for a common man, a gardener, a coolie. It seems as if, in this case, he didn't want to be recognized as a big man, Borolok. He just wanted to be a common man, I think. And I think that's something we could all learn from as a very distinctive thing, is we're always chasing after fame and recognition, and we want people to respect us, and we want more and more attention. And yet Vidyasagar seems to be a model of someone who set about doing what should be done without a great deal of concern that people would lavish praise on him or give him fancy gifts or make him more comfortable than the next man. And I think this finally is why he remains, in a surprising way, so well known to ordinary Bengalis, is because he let himself be ordinary for all that he was an extraordinary man. Is that okay?
Hello.
Hello?
Satyajit Banerjee.
Yes.
Yes, the last question.
My question is that why did Vidyasagar's first article entitled "The Evils of Child Marriage" fail to yield repercussion on the popular mind? The reason is it was based on rational argument and not based on interpretation of the Shastras. In this connection, my query is that how come we correlate between the age of reason or Renaissance in Bengal and the denial of Vidyasagar's first writing?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I don't know that his first writing has been denied, but there's a fair amount of discussion around the shift he made, just as the level of tactics from the first essay, as you say, being premised on reason and empirical observation. He looked at what happened to children in their development when they were married at a young age, and he postulated certain consequences that were negative. And so, as you say, it's a very rational discussion. Why did he shift so profoundly to the Shastric analysis? Is a good question in its own right. Of course, the Shastric analysis is profoundly rational too, and I think we forget that. And it's a mistake to think that the quoting of the Shastras that he does in Vidova Vivaho, it's not blind scripturalism. It's a very canny and sophisticated intellectual exercise. And this is one of the arguments I make in the introduction to the Hindu widow marriages. It's a very, very rational work. It's just, he understood, I think, that if he was to win the hearts and minds of quote unquote Orthodox Hindus, his argument had to be consistent with what the Shastras taught. He said, no one, if it looked as if the lawgivers were opposed to this, no one would do it. So I have to show that it's commensurable with what the lawgivers said. Now, your question, why is Vidyasagar's rationalism undervalued? Is that what you're asking? Perhaps it gets forgotten. Again, I think we look at the image of a Sanskrit Pandit and we see someone who quoted the Shastras and we can think, oh, he was a traditionalist. And if he was a traditionalist, he must not have been able to use reason freely. But I think that's a misunderstanding. And if people feel that way, they need to be educated. Again, here, back to the question, what can we do today? We can help people understand that that's not the narrow kind of person he was. He had a deep respect for and knowledge of the Shastras, but he also had a keen intellect and a rational ability to employ those Shastras for change. So if it's not well enough known, then maybe we need to do more to make that known.
Well, thanks, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, everyone, in fact, for the questions. It was a very interesting interactive session that we had with Professor Hatcher. And now we are moving towards the last leg of today's seminar. So I would now take this opportunity to invite Professor Shurip Narayan Moitro to present to us his observation on the entire webinar, from organizing it till this very last session.
Namaskar and thank you all. Thank you, Abhinanda, for this opportunity. As Dr. Suvash requested me, first of all, I want to express my heartfelt thanks and gratitude to the honorable speakers of this seminar, Professor Ashokendu Sengupta and Professor Brian A. Hatcher, for their consent to be present here and deliver an excellent, thoughtful, thought-provoking speech. I just want to remind us all by restating some words of Vidyasagar. Countrymen, how long will you suffer yourselves to be led away by illusions? Open your eyes for once and see that India, once the land of virtue, is being overflooded with the stream of adultery and feticide. Dip into the spirit of your Shastras. Follow its dictates, and you shall be able to remove the foul bolt from the face of your country. Habit has so darkened your intellect and blunted your feelings that it is impossible for you to have compassion for your helpless widows. Thus, by revisiting Vidyasagar again and again, we could be spirited to cultivate the ideas of rationality, humanity, and equality, once envisaged by the 19th century modernizer of Bengal. With this, thank you. Abhinanda.
Thank you so much, Sharita, for that brief summing up. And before I move on to the last person to speak, which should be Professor Moushumi Roy Choudhury, Associate Professor of History, Chandidash Mahavidyalaya, to present to us the vote of thanks. I would love to thank from my end not only the organizers, but Professor Sengupta and Professor Hatcher for giving me the opportunity to host and for helping us have such an enlightening session. It was truly amazing in every sense of the word. We learned and we were enriched. Thank you. So over to Moushumi for the vote of thanks.
Namaskar. Our distinguished chief guest of the day, Professor Brian A. Hatcher, Professor and Packard Chair of Theology, Department of Religion, Tufts University, Medford, USA. Honorable Speaker, Professor Ashokindu Sengupta, retired head of the Department of Physics, Bidhannagar College, and former chairperson of West Bengal Commission for Protection of Child Rights. Our respected principal, Dr. Sheikh Ataur Rahman, my fellow professors, and all the other participants. On the occasion bicentennial birth year of Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, I, on behalf of the organizing committee, deem it a great honor to propose a vote of thanks to all who have helped us make this international webinar such a resounding success. First of all, I would like to propose a very hearty vote of thanks to our chief guest, Professor Brian A. Hatcher, for gracing today's seminar by his presence. Thank you so much, sir, for your captivating and thought-provoking presentation. It was truly a great experience and honor for us to be able to hear from someone of our stature. I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for Professor Ashokindu Sengupta for his insightful speech. I would like to express our profound gratitude to our principal, Dr. Sheikh Ataur Rahman, for his constant inspiration and relentless support, which have truly helped us making this webinar a success. Next, I would also like to thank our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Subhash Singh Rai, for his enthusiastic effort and contribution toward his event. I would like to extend a very special thanks to Dr. Shayantan Banerjee, Assistant Professor Zoology, for helping us with this technical expertise. I am happy to express my sincere vote of thanks to the wonderful participants who have turned up in such great numbers, not only from our college, but also from other institutes from different parts of our country. Thank you so much for your cooperation. Once again, I thank you all for your encouraging participation. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you so much, Moshamidi, for that wonderful vote of thanks. And with that, with the permission of our respected principal and Shubhashta, would I now proclaim this program to be concluded?
Ekdom. Okay, no problem.
Obviously.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
our
you.
resource.
Thank you, Brian sir, for giving us your valuable time. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. It was a real pleasure. I really appreciated it. And I hope to see you all again soon.
Okay.
Yes.
ভালো থাকবেন।
আবার দেখা হবে। হ্যাঁ, হ্যাঁ।
ভালো থাকবেন।
Thank you. ভালো থাকবেন।
অবশ্যই।
Thanks.
Thank you.
And I now announce this program ended. Thank you and good night to all of you.
Thank you. Good night. Namaskar.
Namaste, sir.
Namaskar. Thank you.
So your Bengali is very good, sir. You said it is not.
Namaste, sir.
Ekdom na.
Sir, namaste. Thank you, sir.
Practice করতে হবে। ঠিক আছে, নমস্কার।
Sir, Pradeep কি বলবেন?
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Subhash.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, Shantan, wind up. Shantan.